But the first thing we're going to do is go down the line, and I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and just basically describe what role they have with data, what role data plays in their current working life.
Yeah, hi everyone. Paul Brierly. I look a lot less tan than that picture up there. So I'm not sure I want to be sat underneath it. So I've been working with CRM for near 20 years now, the last 12 of which in sport. I led kind of when CRM was going through its, from a very immature to more mature process, kicked CRM off at the ECB, so for England cricket. Then did a bit of time in OTT, a couple of years at a startup called 11 Sports, running their global CRM. And then fortunate enough to work for 4 years at the FA. So again, defining what CRM means for that sports organisation in terms of fans, selling out Wembley, as well as all the grassroots as well. And then latterly, I'm consulting here at Wimbledon. I've done some work with winners as well. Just kind of sharing those learnings really, and working with sports organisations to extract value from fan data.
Thanks, Paul. I can't believe you've been doing this for 20 years. 20 years ago, I didn't even know there was a thing called data. So you've definitely beaten me on that one.
Sorry, just for that. What I thought a CRM job was when I first started was working at the Manchester Evening News and the Trinity Mirror newspaper group. And I thought a CRM job was telling ad people to use a system and put data in a system. I never really understood what the value of that was. I just ran around imploring people to do it.
And look at you now.
Well, yeah.
Brilliant, Jamie. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hi, I'm Jamie, everyone. I've been working in marketing for almost 10 years. I'm a performance marketing and email specialist, CRM specialist. I've had the pleasure of working for Fiona for just over a year, so I've been in the sports industry for a year now. I have the pleasure as well of working for Bal on Wimbledon. I in particular, using data to power marketing campaigns, so I've been helping Bal and the guys run their marketing activity, as well as other clients in the sporting world. But happy to be here, and thanks so much, guys.
Hi, I'm Bal. I'm head of revenue and operations here at AFC Wimbledon. So generally, obviously, trying to use data to maximize the revenue for the club. Previously, I worked at Fulham Football Club, and prior to that, I actually first started my first businesses were being a promoter back in Oxford after I graduated.
Okay, we're going to start with you anyway, Bal, so hold on to the microphone. So a lot of people, we're here thanks to Data Talks putting on this great conference today. And of course, Data Talks is a great piece of software. I'm also here talking about data. So we talk software, we talk data, but we also talk about process and cultural adoption, which is really important to enable the data to be used, to enable the technology to use. So Bal, our first question for you. What's been the most challenging sort of area of adopting data for your team to take on board? What has been the key sort of areas of change or cultural adoption that you found the most challenge with?
Yeah, it was, I guess I started working in Wimbledon when we first moved into this stadium. Obviously experienced how at Fulham we'd use data in a kind of very Americanized way, obviously being owned by the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I guess culturally, the main difference coming here was we moved from a stadium that was sold out all the time. Obviously, it was COVID in between, Kings Meadow, which was half the capacity. So I don't think there was so much a culture of needing to understand the value of data. And then obviously came to a stadium that probably had double the capacity. So I think it was just to kind of get the staff we inherited or moved over from Kings Meadow to get used to the idea of how important data is and try, to really maximize attendances, I guess, which was the main thing post-COVID when we opened the stadium.
It is. It's a real learning curve, isn't it? Getting people to understand how valuable it can be. But just talking about Fulham and the Jacksonville Jaguars, I learnt that, and Luke, welcome back to Wimbledon. Really pleased to see you come back here for the ticketing team. But they use data to encourage their team to sell more. I mean, they use it to really power their salespeople to understand how much more commission they can make when they're selling each ticket. So maybe that'll be the next step, to be using that here as well, not just enabling you to implement strategies, but encouraging Luke to earn a bit more commission.
Yeah, we don't want to go down the dynamic pricing route, though. That.
No, well, there's, enough to be said about that one. If anybody has any knowledge about dynamic ticketing pricing in sport and wants to share it, please put your hand up, because my first and last experience was queuing for the Oasis tickets. And if anyone's queuing like that for Man United tickets or Wimbledon tickets, I don't know, different ball game. Jamie, why don't you take the microphone, and just again, talking about change and adoption. So you've come from a highly e-commerce environment, very, very competitive, scraping around for that extra percentage point on the conversion rate. You've been in sport for a year now. What are the key differences that you've seen, not just with Wimbledon, but across your client base compared to your previous environment?
Cool. There's some interesting, it contrasts quite nicely, I think. So from the heavy hitting world of hard-on trading, every penny counts. The systems are actually much simpler in the e-com world. Typically, the data only comes from one place, and it's pretty linear, so that the information is quite straightforward to use, quite straightforward to interpret.
Like point of sale in SKUs.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one website, and that's it, almost entirely. And so the data is quite easy to interpret and quite easy to use, quite simple to put forward, analyze, and turn into marketing activity. Compared to the world of sports, where the systems are countless, there's different places where everything comes from, the ticketing, as we know, there's a big part of that. So it's more complex to use, especially if you're, from comparing the industries, it's a lot more junior, I would say, in terms of skill sets and application of systems. It's to take the data in the sporting world and turn it into something useful in a marketing sense is very complicated compared to my background's in beauty and sporting goods as well. It's quite easy to go, this is the data, this is what works well, and this is what I want to push out to a customer. And I need them to come back quite desperately. There's a lot of that there. Whereas in the sporting sense, it's more about the the cycles of it, so week to week, also season to season, and it's all about the engagement of the fans. So using those metrics to understand what my fans, enjoying, what's engaging for them, compared to I just need to sell something. Tell me the data that will help me sell.
And that goes back to the very first presentation we had from Ping, where the focus was engagement, because engagement generates the data, which we'll be able to generate revenue from. And also linking back to something that Palmer said, for some reason, there's not as much data and digital literacy within the sports industry as there is in other industries. So bringing that back to you now, Paul, as the FA, when you were at the FA with the FA hat on, you had a little bit more resource than Wimbledon. You did. But going back to what Jamie was talking about, the sports industry using different multiple data sources, why don't you talk us through a little bit about the unique data sources when you're a national governing body versus when you're a club, and the way that you use them and the applications to help you achieve the same sort of objectives?
Yeah, I mean, governing bodies all have different remits. There's some people here from different governing bodies. So some own venues, some own teams, some own competitions, some own all of that. But I think the real difference with a governing body and a club necessarily is the grassroots element. So governing bodies are non-profit. That doesn't mean they're not commercial. They derive revenue from the same direct consumer ways football clubs do, and the same B2B revenue streams that football clubs do, as well as broadcast rights. So that's kind of the inbound revenue. The outbound revenue goes to grassroots. So that's an expenditure, right? Well, not always in the CRM world, because two main reasons. So if we look at participants versus fans, they engage twice as much in marketing activity. That's because they're living it. They're volunteering, they're playing, they're refereeing, they're coaching. So there's an enormous amount of engagement value in that fan base. Secondly, they have a higher propensity to attend than the person off the street. So a participant is more likely to attend than anyone else on your database. So, okay, that's seemingly an opportunity for the governing body. What about the club? Well, just been at Wimbledon here just for a few months, there's a foundation. In some organisations, that's kind of separate, mainly because of the structural organisation and how it's kind of staffed and built. But that is another silo that can be brought in from a data perspective, from an operational perspective. And we talk a lot in marketing about life cycle. Well, there's no better life cycle than someone who's taken part in a summer camp run by the foundation and brought through to become a fan of the club and then of retail and other value for the club. So there is a grassroots element in most sports organisations. It has huge potential because I've seen it at the FA and the ECB in terms of engagement and in terms of kind of monetary and life cycle value.
I'll add to that. When we were working for UEFA, we did some regression analysis on the propensity of participants and former participants to purchase tickets and merchandise. If anybody's interested in the research, we're happy to share it. We found that if you're a current player of your sport, you will spend 6.4 times more on tickets and 3.8 times more on merchandise than a non-player. And if you were a former player, again, the ratio was still higher. I just can't remember the numbers. So absolutely crucial, if you're a governing body, you've got a whole bank of participants. Please don't think of them just as participants. Also think of them as ticket buyers, merchandise buyers, people who will support your sponsors. But conversely, think about your ticket buyers as potential participants. Was that something that the FA did? Would they often look through their fan base for referees, coaches, players?
Yes, I mean, look, the ECB latterly, I know Luke's just come from the ECB. The ECB latterly, I mean, the 100, the whole purpose of the 100 was to kind of promote grassroots activity. It's full circle. I mean, even in bowl, we would promote grassroots opportunities. There was quite a tight connection in terms of converting fans to play. It was almost the duty of the governing body to do that. What was less explored was the other way that you said. Even though there's this latent value in the heavily engaged participant to be a fan, that was less explored. And as I say, I do want to equate it back to football clubs because there might be a reticence to capture data and market to data that's come from the foundation element of the club, the community element of the club, as if that's not to be touched. But it's a great way to start that relationship and almost push people down the funnel to then attend matches.
And actually, not just the foundation to the club, but what about from top down? What about the Football League, Bal, who've got a database of all fans of football? What about the Football League sharing their data down to the clubs? And when we say sharing, by the way, we're all fully data legislation compliant. If anyone ever has any questions about data legislation, please fire them up here. We use the term share. Of course, we mean share under full data legislation compliant processes, of which there are many. But can you imagine, Bal, if the Football League would take the same approach that you're taking with the trust, with the community, would take the same approach with you? And what about when you play in FA Cup games? Or, okay, maybe you don't get to that round, or maybe you haven't done for some time. But for those clubs who do play in the latter stages of the FA Cup, where the FA themselves are generating ticketing data, imagine if they would share that down to the clubs. As the host of the FA Cup, Paul, did you ever see any of that happening with the FA? Any willingness to share data with the participating clubs?
FA Cup less so, because the clubs would manage all the ticketing, so they would get the data. Even the final, yeah, the half, we had some Club Wembley corporate bit, but it was still split and sold by the clubs. The ECB was a good example of that in my time there, where the counties would sell their tickets. This was pre-100. This is the old county competition where the clubs are independent operators and brands in that tournament. But the ECB would play a role to, okay, let's help you aggregate your data and let's give you a kind of essential understanding and insight of your data. And we would share data from England down to counties. Actual records, and that was similar to how we've talked about in terms of doing it for commercial partners. The decision was the customers. You come to opt in for England, this all glamorous England team, and if you want to opt in for your county as well. At the FA, we actually did it to the county FAs, so that the local organising bodies rather than the football clubs. But yeah, this notion of fan comes to glamorous central national point, but gets the option to then opt into other levels and then have a data sharing structure which kind of federates and hands that data down. Yeah.
So by show of hands, how many people here are from governing bodies or international federations? And how many are from clubs? Brilliant. So we've got some key takeaways there. Federations can support clubs, clubs can support federations, where there is the model. Let's move on then. So of course what we want to think about is setting a new standard. That comes with looking at return on investment, as we saw in some of the earlier presentations. Over to you, Bal. It's still early days relatively for the club, but where have you so far seen the most benefit? Where can you actually track some return on investment?
Yeah, I guess we've still, in terms of ticketing and merchandise, since in the last 3 years, we've grown those areas significantly year on year, even though we got relegated after our first season. Guess with a more sort of personalised email as a main kind of driver for that. But where you can kind of track things most is probably working with Jamie on our digital ads, where we've increased the spend, but had quite good tracking and been able to look at the conversions on Google Analytics to see what's actually led directly to purchases on our site.
Brilliant. That's a nice segue to you, Jamie, because you came to Winners as a performance marketer predominantly focused on paid social, and now you're working across email as well. What have you seen as the relative strengths now you're working across both channels, and in some cases cross-channel, multi-channel? What are the relative strengths that you've seen in first party versus paid social, and when have you combined the two and how?
Cool, thank you, Fiona. So the example Bal gave there is we've used it in ticketing campaigns, season ticketing this year for renewals and things like that. So the great strength of the paid social activity, especially for Wimbledon, is reaching new audiences. So we're able to inject investment there, target new fans, bring new people to the website. We can remarket to them. So we're creating this new pool of fans that we can hopefully gradually build through and bring on the journey of the club. And then incorporating first-party data with that is making sure that we can actually ensure we're targeting new fans. So we do it in a nice way whereby the investment is set just to new fans. We're taking our first-party data, we're taking existing fans, existing ticket buyers, existing season ticket holders, and we're suppressing them from our activity. So we're essentially not wasting budget. And that was helpful in some of our ROI for those campaigns. Some really nice results.
When you were in your previous agency, where you focused predominantly on paid digital, was that a tactic being used there by you and your colleagues, using first-party data? So that's something you've seen very
Yeah, and even more so in a granular way. So you rather than just looking at ticket holders and existing fans, they take that to a granular level and look at categories and brands and purchases of specific products and apply that with the same campaign methodology and exclude that in more segmented ways, even so.
So question to the audience, please, by show of hands. For those of you whose organisations are using paid social, have you gone to the stage of using your first-party data to inform the way you're using that paid social? Just show of hands if you are currently doing that. Brilliant, fantastic, super, great. Those of you who aren't, it's a huge opportunity there that we're missing, that to ensure your paid social media budgets go further, I'll work harder for you, use your first-party data. I'm just going to pull it back to you now, Paul. So you're in this unique, fantastic position where you're predominantly data and tech, but you understand the implication on marketing. Yeah, so you're not marketing and don't quite understand the tech. You fundamentally understand the tech and the data. You do. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the importance of technology versus process. Now, bearing in mind this is a Data Talks event, but I know for a fact that Data Talks would align with us in agreement that software is not the silver bullet, that we still need everything else around it. So why don't you give us your spin on that, please?
Yeah, I'm glad you dropped that bit in as well at the end. I know Winners are pragmatic about this. People, the balance of people and processes and systems, and I know Data Talks are as well. And that's why I think, and Bal and I agree, and the stakeholders at Wimbledon agree, that it feels like the right fit, the right bit of tech, and the right people to really take Wimbledon forward. I'm quite pragmatic about this. I've seen white elephant systems, big CRM systems, oversold into businesses and underused. So people are as important as systems. I don't see a world anywhere soon where systems are replacing people. People need to be there to extract value from systems, crucially. And I won't be at Wimbledon forever on this project. When I leave, that has to be handed over to people who see value in the systems that they're given. Those people, you mentioned processes, those people need processes. That's hard at a small organization because people are putting out the immediate fire. They're running to the first fire, the fire that burns the most, the fire that needs most attention, and the nearest and quickest opportunity, naturally. But data can become a small part of everybody's role. It often is. The ticket office manager's already using a system, the finance guy's using a system, the marketers are using their data. But what Data Talks will really do for us, we hope, is bring that together and just give a window to that data to everyone. A simple window. It won't give everyone answers, but it'll give some answers, but it'll encourage more questions. Well, that's an audience, that's telling us this. How do we market to them? How do we reach them? How do we look at that or learn more about that certain segment? So the system will give us that window. The people are there to extract information from that window to the data, and the processes hopefully will be there to ensure that that information, that knowledge, similar to what Tom was talking about earlier, data is only knowledge, it's insight and it's understanding of an audience. The processes are there to ensure that when we know something, we can act and extract value from it.
So I actually have been working with a client, a national governing body client, over the last couple of weeks because they've spotted changes in their data. So again, going back to the insights that we get from data, we have dashboards and they tell us instantly that something's happening that shouldn't be. And this particular client saw a massive decline in basically their quantity of opt-ins, marketing opt-ins. Of course, marketing opt-ins is one of the most valuable data points for you guys in the audience. And through their dashboarding, they'd seen a massive drop in the conversion rate. And so they needed to explore why was that happening. And it came down to process. The process was that their athletes, their participants had to fill in a paper form. Now on the paper form, they implemented the PECR soft opt-in. Those of you who don't know about the PECR soft opt-in, PECR, really recommend you look into it. It's like a golden jewel that's hidden that only advanced e-commerce practitioners like Interflora or the Times Online or Tesco really understand. So this client implemented the PECR soft opt-in with our guidance on their paper forms. And so, of course, under the PECR soft opt-in, you don't need to opt in, you need to opt out, which means, of course, you get a higher conversion rate. But the paper forms were then given to the clubs, because this was a national governing body, who inputted the data. The minute you bring in a manual process like this, of course, things can go awry. Not if you've got great processes. So first couple of years, great processes. The clubs knew how to interpret the PECR soft opt-in, make sure that the software, because the software vendors would not change their process, make sure it went in the right manner. But of course, we're 4 years later. 4 years later, and that brilliantly documented process for 2.5 years that had led to an 80% conversion rate suddenly dropped down to 40% because the process had not been maintained. People had changed, a lot of it was volunteer staff, the training had dropped, the documentation hadn't been updated, and as a result, they'd lost quite a few thousand of potential opt-ins. The good thing is, the dashboarding allowed them to see that. The understanding of the process allowed them to understand what they needed to revert it, go back, and of course, applying data legislation enabled them to understand how they could recover that position. So technology is important, data is important, but we cannot underestimate the importance of process. On that point, Bal, we'll come back to you and ask you, what are your next steps? And you can talk specifically about the next steps of your implementation with Data Talks, talk generally about the growing awareness of data within the club, and again, back to specifically about how you're going to continuously justify investing more, whether it's in the people, the tech, or the processes, to make sure you get the right return on investment. What comes next for you?
Like most of like all of the EFL clubs, we obviously had a change in our website at the beginning of this season and going to shortly have a new app. our kind of vision of where we see this whole thing going with Data Talk, especially once we've integrated our ticketing with them. We've already done some elements like of our Shopify, is whereby our members can sort of log in and automatically like receive a discount because it recognizes them in the system as being a member. Another area would be on sort of more targeted, you know, where we want to get to is like the point that if someone's bought a home shirt, when they log into a website, especially as we kind of push our members to kind of have their profile and it kind of their experience would only show them probably more an away shirt in terms of buying if we've got any adverts going on. So that's kind of where we're trying to get to, and it's like working with Data Talks and Paul and Jamie to kind of achieve that. The other area where we're a bit lacking is, I guess, in using data with driving sponsorship, and we're also getting a lot more requests nowadays from sort of bigger online sort of companies that are, you know, they're looking at us as they look at any sort of commercial advertising deal in terms of cost per acquisition. So we kind of just need to give them a better platform to kind of use our database to generate them revenues as well.
So 2 key workstream areas: personalisation, so your customers, your fans, get what they're looking for quicker to enable them to say yes, and also moving more into sponsorship. I'm really excited to hear you say that, because I sold sponsorship for many, many years, and we've recently completed a pilot with you on the power of data to drive sponsorship. Who sells sponsorship in your club, Bal?
So yeah, we obviously have a sponsorship team. I think Andy's around somewhere, not in the room at this moment, but yeah, that's.
And he's starting to get more comfortable with using data to generate leads, but then to help the sponsors themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Leads.
And yeah, we're just seeing across, you know, we're getting more and more requests. We've never been, you know, if you compare our kind of sales process to a Premier League club, you know, there is a difference in approach and in terms of giving sponsors valuable data and kind of justifying why, you know, we're trying to change the type of partners that partner with us from being, you know, friends of the club or kind of fans who are wealthy to like international and national partners. And that's the whole drive of changing what our brand is and giving value back to sponsors, essentially.
I once heard a woman called Georgina, I can't remember her last name, head of marketing or head of something at the FA for many years. Georgina Lewis, yeah. I once heard Georgina Lewis, she was asked a question about how much does the FA use data when it comes to sponsorship strategy? And she said, oh, we lead with the data. We don't even start a sponsorship discussion unless we've got the data. Anyway, coming back to you then, Paul. So Bal just talked at the strategic level about some of the more the directions he's going to focus on. He's talked a little bit about the tracking and the return on investment. What quick wins have you been able to see for Wimbledon? And more importantly, for the attendees, how would they go about identifying their quick wins? Because that's what we're really trying to do, isn't it? Get the quick wins to provide the motivation to generate the budget that's going to allow us to think strategically. What have you seen at Wimbledon, and what could audience members look for?
Yes, I think what I've learned over the piece is, in my whole career really, it's to have multi-speed tracks of any project. I fell into the trap very early on of having kind of big bang releases. Let's wait months for this system to arrive and solve all our problems. That's not a sensible way of doing things. So at Wimbledon, we're trying to have some quick win tracks. I started here right in the midst of the season ticket resale process, working with winners, working with the marketing team here. Some guys are in the room. Getting renewals in quick and getting new season tickets sold to sell out 5,000 season tickets for an 8,000 seat venue, so which we managed, and a lot of that was the paid media bit that we've talked about and various other channels and tactics. So bums on seats, tickets, using data to sell tickets effectively was number one. Number two, dial-up retail. And some of these are quick wins. So I think we under-communicate. I don't think it's undersell, it's under-communicate retail. There's often a kind of a fear or reticence to do that as well in sport, but it's cool stuff, right? Our shop, take a look in the shop downstairs. Wimbledon kind of lead the way in retro, cool, you know, all these kind of collections, and we can stylize that, we can make that very creative, and we're starting to do that every month, or even as embed it in some of the weekly communications. So dial up retail. And another one is data acquisition. It's over-complicated in sport. We've talked about gamification. Some of the stuff from Ping is kind of very almost deeper engagement, but Data Talks have a gamification platform as well, and it's easy to do. Just put competitions out there. I'd love to say that there's a more complicated science to it. There isn't. The sports fans love competitions. At the FA, after every game, be it Grealish, Foden, Kane, whoever had the man of the match or better performance, or even for the Lionesses as well, win their shirt. Straight out there. The key is being relevant and fast. Just get the competition out there. Sign-ups will come in. It's literally like dropping your net into the social media pool. So they're the quick wins. The slow wins we've talked about. It's being more systematic about how we present and use data with Data Talks.
I love that you mentioned competitions. So have a guess. Somebody be brave enough to have a guess. How many competitions do you think Man United run a year? Now, I know Man United is a different beast to many of us sat in the room today, but have a guess. How thirsty are Man United fans for competitions that they can run this many competitions per year? Anyone take a guess? Be brave. It's a bloody good guess, David. He said 120. It's actually 85, but you're still in the sort of ballpark. I was with a client, a national governing body client, who'd never ever run a competition. We finally encouraged them to do so, but they said, we don't have anything to give away. And some gentleman in the room said, well, we've got all those water bottles in the office they had like 15 water bottles. They ran a competition with 15 water bottles and got 4,500 marketing opt-ins. People out there will enter a competition for a water bottle if they're engaged with your sport. So I'm so pleased you brought that up. I'm going to come back to you, though. You gave a great quick wins. The data acquisition one is relevant for anybody in the room, but we've got national governing bodies in here. Why don't you take the ticket example to something that's more relevant for NGBs who sometimes don't prioritise tickets, they prioritise participants. What's their quick win?
In terms of tickets? Or in terms of anything, MG? I mean, at different levels of maturity and different situations. What I found at the ECB, that's going back 10 years now, is a very dusty old data set of unused grassroots data, which is essentially performance data. Cricket is a very data-rich sport, more so than football. We found at the FA, but at the ITF, we know we're sat on that kind of information as well. Certain governing bodies have this, and just put yourself in the mindset of people expect to give information, people expect to get information back, particularly in sport. And the wearables market, the Fitbits, the Stravas of this world have shown us that. So if you have participation data, no matter what format it is, try and structure it. Try and garner your opt-ins and do all the legal bit, obviously. And then try and feed it back in any infographic way you can, through any channel you can, be it on the website, be it on the email. Engagement with personalized performance data will be far bigger and far more powerful than any kind of content you can share with your market, as I've found it at governing bodies. So huge potential. Once you've got that engagement, we've talked about pushing people down funnels to all other buying opportunities. But grassroots performance data, if you have it, is most certainly the most powerful data for engagement.
I actually have one of my favourite use cases that links participation to merchandise, which you've already mentioned. We went to work for the Finland Football Association under our role with UEFA, and it was a 3-month project, and they were sitting on 170,000 records of players that had registered to play with the federation. But it was something like 2016. They'd never asked for marketing opt-ins. They'd never even thought about it. They just captured the email address naturally. Well, of course, they didn't have the right to use it for marketing because they'd not asked for marketing opt-ins. And even pre-GDPR, there was a need to do this legally. But the head of marketing said, bugger that, not bothered about the legal status. I'm going to take a risk. Because that's fundamentally what data legislation comes down to. We We should follow the law. Indeed, we should follow the law. But sometimes we take a risk assessment and we might decide not to. This guy decided not to. It was November, so the timing played into this. He sent an email, or we sent an email 3 times to his 170,000 players promoting online shop, which they'd never ever done. He achieved 4 times his annual merchandise sales target in 3 emails. And that immediately exposed the Finland Football Federation to the power of email marketing and using their data. And now, for a small, relatively small federation, they massively punch above their weight. So again, if any of you NGBs are sitting on data and not clear about how to use it to drive the other business purposes or ticketing data, there's so much that can be done that get those quick wins. Let's just ask, any questions from the floor? There's a book at stake here, or 2 books actually. Anybody got any questions from the floor at the moment? Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. I've got 2 questions. First of all, how much is an opt-in email address worth? And question number 2, what single piece of data do you wish you had?
So who would you like to answer the first question on the value of a marketing opt-in? Well, who would like to take that question? And then I'll also give my answer.
I mean, it's a really tough one, that, because it's relative. So I spent 6 months at L'Oreal, head of CRM there. We were willing to pay £1 for it. That was what we bought it for, and it used to convert to about £3 or £4. So that's kind of the best benchmark I have for the value of it. But that is so relevant to the products we sold, which were mainly fragrances and cosmetics. I would guess it's I can't wait to hear Fiona's answer on this, because it's probably a lot better than this. But I would imagine the answer lies in the data, the conversion rates, and the lifetime value of the customer. I'd also like to know your answer to it as well.
So yeah, I'm aligned with you. It's relative to your business, and to us it links back to the principle of understanding. You talked about understanding your customers. It's understanding what we call the customer lifetime value. How much is a customer worth to you for the duration of their relationship with you? Unfortunately, that can be quite a task to calculate customer lifetime value, but it is worth doing, because once you know your customer lifetime value, you know how much you're prepared to invest to get that piece of data. But there are quick wins. There are ways we can, without having to go through CLTV, as it's called, start to think about how much we're prepared to spend. And Paul just gave a rule of thumb. He knows that it cost him this much to acquire, but he knows that actually that client spent X. Another way to look at it is how much it does cost you to acquire. So with Jamie's head on, you often do cost per acquisition exercises, and we can see that it can cost anywhere between 40p, which we've done for some clients, to £4 to acquire an email address or a marketing opt-in. So again, depending on how you're going to use it and what you're going to get out of it, will show you whether it was worth the 40p or the £4. But the catch-all is, it's relevant to your business, so we can't answer that, sorry. But if we did some CLTV for you, we could tell you specifically. And then the second question, what's the piece of data you wish you had? Bal, what one piece of data do you not have that you wish you had, or you have but you wish you had more of?
Just trying to think.
Gun to your head.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very good to know how much, because otherwise we might spend more than £4 on acquiring new email opt-ins.
I'm going to make it really simple. I'm going to say something that I welcome anyone arguing with me about, but note that I'm very good at arguments. An email address, and I'm not even saying an email address with an opt-in. I'm saying an email address. There is so much stuff you can do with an email address, and I challenge anyone to tell me that an email address is more valuable than a mobile number. I challenge you. An email address. So going back to Paul's point about competitions or forms, acquire as many email addresses as you can. The holy grail is an email address with a marketing opt-in, But if we don't get the marketing opt-in, there is still a framework under GDPR called consent, service, legitimate interest. We can still use that email address that can ultimately lead us to a marketing opt-in. So mine is an email address, and that's an easy answer to remember. So anyone want to?
I raise this because it's quite a nuanced one, and pertinent to this club, this kind of fabulous club with a fabulous community following in a kind of a prosperous and wealthy area as well, being part of London, but also where we are in southwest London. We're trying to build up a volunteer database. So as a subset of the fan, when we go live with the profile, the online profile that Bal's mentioned, we're trying to elicit or ask the question, do you have any skills to volunteer? What's your title? What's your career experience? And that can help us in a few ways. It could literally allow us to drum up volunteers if we need to know that we need, someone to help us with data protection, for example, or with certain marketing or commercial things. But it can also help expand the lead network to get us into new networks for B2B partnerships. So I mention that because it's a slightly different data point. It's not one I've ever asked for before, but it's a KPI now for Wimbledon to try and acquire that.
Yeah, so specific relationship with the entity, whether you're a volunteer, coach, a referee, a ticket buyer, really valuable. Postcode incredibly valuable as well. So, but I'm sticking with the email address. Thank you for the questions. Any more?
Yeah, for Paul. As you said, you worked for L'Oreal, and I'm kind of curious, like, what are the similarities, but also differences between, obviously with sport is people, they really feel a connection, and with fragrances is maybe more a kind of like need, but also maybe some kind of connection. But what kind of similarities and differences are there from a data strategy and what you found from your experience?
Well, they don't turn up. You don't see them. They don't come and make noise on a Saturday in your venue. So there's a distance. So which works out in two ways. One, you become more data dependent to understand them because they're not necessarily culturally aligned. They're not necessarily buying or waving the same flag as you. So there's a real unity. I mean, the two things I think that differs, and the real privilege of us all working in sport is we all believe in the same kind of codified brand. And secondly, so we're all as one when you market to a sports fan base. And secondly, engagement is a tap-in. You're very welcome in the inbox when you're talking to a sports fan. So I think the difference there in cosmetics or any retailers, you're probably less welcome in the inbox. Open rates aren't as high. And because you don't necessarily assume that person is of the same team or fan base as you, they're far less brand loyal. They could be going to Clinique or elsewhere. Then you are more data dependent to retain them. So it kind of expects of you more marketing rigor and less, kind of more head, less heart in terms of your marketing processes. Fortunately, L'Oreal have kind of thousands of heads and analysts and marketers, and I mean, they're the fourth biggest advertiser in the world, so that they have some serious operations. But yeah, hopefully that's a good answer.
That kind of aligns with what Jamie said, that it's kind of an easier job because you've got a single data source and, and they're more sophisticated. But it also is a reminder to the sports industry that once we can adopt the strategies that the L'Oreals and the makeup brands in this world use, you'll achieve a lot more, a lot quicker because you've got that loyalty, that natural brand loyalty that won't wane. Any more questions from the floor?
Yeah.
We've got two questions. Are we okay to have two? Great.
With much of the data coming from demographic of male football teams, probably middle-aged men supporters, how are you using that data to increase the engagement in the women's game?
Who's that question to?
Open to the panel.
Who would like to take it? Okay, so firstly, can I clarify your question? Did you say middle-aged male supporters? Okay.
Of typical
general demographic. Okay. So, firstly, I'm a data geek, so I don't make assumptions like that. But if I had a database of middle-aged male supporters and I wanted to understand how could I convert them to fans of the women's game, there's three ways you get data. Well, there's 4 or 5, but the 3 ways that we as sports organisations most have within our control is we ask them, yeah? So we ask them, are you interested in the women's game? Run a competition, send out a survey, send out a form, and just ask them, are you interested in the women's game? Second way is watch what they're doing. Are they buying tickets? Are they engaging with content? Are they doing stuff that's related to the women's game? And track that. Somebody, you put into your email newsletter a story about the women's game along with 5 stories about the men's game. Everybody who clicks on the women's story, we can assume they're interested, yeah? So we tag them as showing an interest. Bought tickets to the women's game, they're interested in the women's game, send them more content about the women's game. And then the third thing is we try and find out about their demographics. We try not to make assumptions, but if they are female, we see how much does that jibe with the women's game being followed by women, or the women's game being followed by the men's game. There's no shortcut, but the general principles are ask, watch, generate, buy. We can buy data as well. We don't encourage buying email addresses, but we do encourage buying data, what we call data enhancements. So I've already got their first name, their last name, their postcode, their email address. What data mart can I send it off to for them to send me back some information about their interests? When you combine using your first-party data with something like Meta that does provide interest, we can do that. We can create an audience of every male football fan in our database and then try and combine that with Meta's ability to identify what other areas of interest they have. So there's no one tactic. It's a combination of tactics and processes that will ultimately help you get there.
I couldn't have answered it better. And the only addition I would add is the FA example. So less from a data perspective, but from a brand perspective, we deliberately kind of brought the men's and women's team together. They were England. We united the identity. We even tried to move away from Lions and Lionesses, but that ship had sailed. Lionesses is the brand unto itself now. And what we found also from a data perspective is more men, the actual attendance of the Lionesses game was still more male dominated, and even more so in broadcast. So in broadcast, it was still like 80-20 male. So we've gone quickly was this notion of, well, men attend the men and women fans attend the women. And also gone was the notion when we brought the brands together that the teams are exclusive. You could, I mean, with international football, you attend so infrequently. We had such high churn for England matches at Wembley for the men that you could your second match was equally as likely to be a women's match as a men's match. So the audiences were kind of, from an attendance standpoint, non-exclusive and didn't need to be separated. That was just the FA experience.
There's a gentleman with a question over here, please, Palmer. Thank you. And if you just let us know who the question is for, please.
There we go. Perfect. Guys, it's just for the whole panel. Going through a lot of airports recently, you always have to scan your ticket upon purchasing, which builds a really good consumer profile for airports. Has that ever been considered in stadiums, particularly if you're discussing sponsorships and the quality of data which you can use to generate sponsorships? Has that ever been a plausible system that you would consider?
Yeah, so this is about having much more sophisticated point of sale, yeah. So was it you, Bal, that was looking at upgrading your point of sale? I can't remember, but it is possible, it is feasible. We have one client definitely using improved point of sale, but yeah, it's about making sure that the cash register in effect has that functionality. At the moment, I would say what's more important for rights holders, rights owners rather, is because we know who's bought a ticket, thanks to our access control, we know who's actually accessed the stadium. Being able to know which of our ticket buyers, ticket holders, match attendees have purchased at point of sale, I would say that's probably a little bit more valuable than just general customer profiling. I would say that being able to link the person who buys a beer, a pork pie, or a pucker pie, should I say, back to the person in your database who bought the ticket, attended the game, bought merchandise is more valuable. And we can do that really simply. I don't know if you've noticed in retail outlets these days, they're now saying, can I email you a copy of your receipt? If we could upgrade our POSs, just to have that tiny change, which is a minor change compared to what you just talked about, just to say, can we email you your receipt back to the value of an email address, we'd be able to link that receipt and its contents to the email address that was used to purchase the ticket, which will align with the ticket ID that we can see that is scanned through the access control. So my interpretation is that's more valuable. There is a valuable to understanding customer profiles, but only if you can link it back to an individual person, so you can use it for engagement, back to the purpose of an email address. And by the way, I hate that thing at the airports. It's no longer legal requirement. So you can actually stand there and say, no, I don't have it. Whereas before you couldn't, but now you can.
Sorry, that was my question. So linking your customer purchases back to the ticketing information.
Well, the club, that doesn't happen in retail at the airport, because the person that owns the data of the person who bought the ticket is the airline, because you bought with British Airways, yeah? The people who own the retail outlet, they're either the big alpha retail or they're an individual shop. They're not actually getting that person's data. They're just getting the fact that a person travelling from London to Africa also bought 3 litres of gin. But the real value is who was that person flying from London to Africa. Are you laughing at my examples? Palmer. Yeah, 3 bottles of gin.
It's more Bal.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely want to go down that route, especially being members-owned organisation. We want to be able to give people discounts on buying F&B at the game, and obviously if we know who they are, then we can give them targeted offers. We just haven't invested at this moment in having the scanning at point of purchase for F&B. I think it'll be interesting where technology is going. We're still working out whether we're using how we're going to use digital ticketing going forwards, whether it's down the Apple system, Apple Wallet system, or a QR code, and that kind of determines all of that. I was at Apple, and they were saying that if you have a season ticket card in your wallet with your payment card, you wouldn't need to tap twice on like a loyalty system. So there's some arguments for going down that route, but most ticketing providers would tell you to try and keep within the ticketing domain, so you use QR codes and not go out to Apple Pay. So yeah, we once we qualify exactly where we're going with that, I think then we can decide what we'll do on the payment systems.
And that's the key point, Bal, trying to figure out what you're trying to achieve here, because there's so many different ways to achieve it. I just remember the club that is introducing that principle in their POS is Notts County Football Club. They are not Man United when it comes to resources. They're a relatively lean organisation operating with the same level of budgets here, but they found a solution to provide them with that POS product that will enable them to link in-stadium purchases with online purchases, with ticket buyers, etc. Great question.
Great, thank you very much for the panel. My main takeaway, and I think this is something, is that the technology has come a long way. I think whether it's 20 years or 1 year, but the exciting thing is that it's still going forward, and I think how we utilize and what we do with it in the future, to me, there's so many open pathways, and I think this is where kind of get creative and exciting about what to do with your data. That was my
Thank you.
takeaway.
Can I just ask one question now?
Yeah.
Palmer, who's getting the books? Oh, okay. Oh, very diplomatic. He wants to do that offline.
Yeah, okay, so we're not yet at the 3 bottle of gins, but there is a coffee break right now, so please have a coffee, a little break, and we'll reconvene here. We'll call you over. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, guys, for being on the panel.